The pain was unbearable. Not just the cramping that felt like my body was tearing itself apart from the inside, but the realization that something was terribly wrong. I had been bleeding for hours, and what started as heavy spotting had turned into something that genuinely scared me. At 12 weeks pregnant, I knew this wasn't normal. My husband Mark drove me to the hospital at 2 in the morning, his jaw tight, saying nothing. I remember clutching the door handle, trying not to scream every time we hit a bump. When we got to the emergency room, I could barely walk. The nurses took one look at me and rushed me back immediately. They confirmed it within 20 minutes. I'd lost the baby and I was hemorrhaging badly. The doctor's face went from concerned to alarmed when she checked the ultrasound. She started barking orders to nurses, and suddenly there were 6 people in the room hooking me up to IVs and prepping me for an emergency procedure. I was losing too much blood too fast. Mark stood in the corner, pale and silent, his phone clutched in his hand. I reached for him, terrified, thinking I might actually die right there. He squeezed my hand once, told me he'd be right outside, and then he was gone. The last thing I remember before they put me under was wondering why he looked so relieved to leave. When I woke up 4 hours later, groggy and weak, the first thing I asked the nurse was where my husband was. She looked uncomfortable, glancing at the door like she was expecting him to walk in any second. He'd left, she told me, about 3 hours ago. Said he needed to clear his head and get some air. My phone was on the table next to me, and I had 2 text messages. One from my mom asking how I was doing, one from my best friend Sarah. With no words, just a photo attachment. My hands were shaking as I opened it, some part of me already knowing what I was about to see. There he was, my husband. The man who just lost his child and left his wife bleeding out in a hospital bed. He was at Murphy's Bar downtown, the one near his office that all his coworkers hung out at. He wasn't crying. He wasn't sitting alone, drowning his sorrows. He was laughing, his arm around his coworker Jennifer, the one he'd always said was just a friend. They were doing shots. His other coworkers were there too, all of them looking way too happy for 2 in the morning. But it was the caption on Jennifer's Instagram story that made my blood run cold. She'd posted a boomerang of Mark taking a shot with the caption, "Finally free, new beginnings," with champagne and celebration emojis. They were celebrating. While I was fighting for my life, while our baby was gone, he was at a bar celebrating his freedom. Sarah had screenshot everything before Jennifer made her account private. There were more photos. Mark and Jennifer dancing. Mark and Jennifer kissing in a corner booth. His hand on her lower back in a way that made it crystal clear this wasn't new. This wasn't a grief-driven mistake. This had been going on for a while, and losing the baby wasn't a tragedy to him. It was an opportunity. I stared at those photos until my vision blurred, not from tears, but from pure rage. The nurse came back to check on me and found me sitting up, yanking out my IV. She tried to get me to lie back down, told me I needed to rest, that I'd lost a dangerous amount of blood. I told her I needed my phone charger and my laptop. I had work to do. Mark finally showed up at the hospital around 7 in the morning, reeking of alcohol and perfume. He had the audacity to look annoyed that I was awake, like I'd ruined his night by not staying unconscious longer. He asked how I was feeling in this flat, disinterested tone, the same way you'd ask a stranger about the weather. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, this man I'd been with for 6 years, married to for 3, and realized I'd never actually known him at all. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, then launched into this rehearsed explanation about needing to process his grief, about how he couldn't handle hospitals, about how he'd gone to blow off steam with coworkers who happened to be out. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. I let him finish his little performance, then asked him one question. Did Jennifer help him process his grief? The color drained from his face. He tried to backtrack immediately, stumbling over his words, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that Sarah had misunderstood what she saw. I pulled up my phone and showed him the screenshots. All of them. His face went from pale to red, and then he did something I'll never forget. He got angry at me. Started yelling about how I had no right to have people spying on him, how he was grieving too, how I was always so controlling and paranoid. A nurse came in and told him to lower his voice or leave. He chose to leave, slamming the door behind him so hard the whole room shook. I sat there in that hospital bed, weak and empty and furious, and I made a decision. If he wanted to be free so badly, I was going to make sure freedom cost him everything. The thing about Mark that everyone at his job loved was his image. He was the golden boy at Patterson and Associates, the senior financial analyst who volunteered to organize the company charity drives, who brought in donuts every Friday, who everyone thought was this stand-up family man. He'd spent years carefully cultivating that reputation, and it had paid off. He was up for a promotion to junior partner, a position that came with a massive salary bump and his own office. The company prided itself on family values and ethical conduct. Their biggest client was a conservative Christian organization that managed pension funds. Mark knew this, Jennifer knew this, and they'd been stupid enough to celebrate their affair publicly in a bar frequented by their coworkers because they thought I'd never find out. I spent 3 days in the hospital recovering, and I used every single moment to plan. Sarah brought me my laptop, and I started digging. Turned out Jennifer had been sloppy. Her Instagram wasn't the only place she'd posted about their relationship. She had a Twitter account where she'd been subtweeting about being with the taken man for months, talking about how he's leaving her soon and we're meant to be. She'd posted photos of expensive gifts Mark had given her, dinners at restaurants I knew we couldn't afford, weekend trips I thought were work conferences. I screenshot everything. Then I went through Mark's emails. He'd been stupid enough to use our shared iPad for his personal email, and he'd never logged out. There were hundreds of messages between him and Jennifer going back almost a year. Explicit photos, plans to be together once the pregnancy situation resolved itself. That phrase made me want to throw up, but I screenshot those too. Here's what most people don't understand about revenge. It's not about one big dramatic moment. It's about being methodical, patient, and strategic. I wasn't going to confront Mark again. I wasn't going to give him a chance to spin the narrative or do damage control. I was going to let the truth do the work for me, and I was going to make sure it reached exactly the right people at exactly the right time. Mark's brother called me on my second day in the hospital, ostensibly to check on me, but really to run interference for Mark. He did this whole speech about how Mark was struggling, how losing the baby had hit him harder than he knew how to express, how men deal with grief differently. Then came the kicker. He told me I should give Mark a break, that everyone makes mistakes when they're emotional, that I was being too harsh. I listened to the entire thing without interrupting, then told him I appreciated his concern and hung up. I added him to my list. When I got home from the hospital, Mark was already there with his mom. She'd apparently driven 6 hours to help us through this difficult time, but it became clear pretty quickly that she was there to run defense for her son. She made me tea I didn't want, fluttered around trying to take care of me, and kept making these pointed comments about how marriage requires forgiveness and understanding. She told me about Mark's father, who'd apparently had an affair early in their marriage, and how she'd chosen to forgive him because that's what strong women do. She said sometimes men stray when they're under pressure and it doesn't mean anything, and the best thing I could do was let it go and focus on healing our marriage. I smiled and nodded and let her talk. Then I excused myself to rest and spent the next 2 hours in the bedroom forwarding emails. The first person I sent everything to was Mark's direct supervisor, a woman named Patricia, who took the company's ethics policy very seriously. I sent her a carefully worded email explaining that I felt obligated to bring something to her attention that might constitute a conflict of interest or violation of company policy. I attached screenshots of Mark and Jennifer's relationship, including the ones that showed they'd been using company time and resources for personal meetups.
I mentioned the company trip to Chicago, where they'd shared a hotel room while expensing it as separate rooms. I included the Instagram story with its finally free caption and the timestamp showing it was posted while I was in emergency surgery. Then I copied HR on the email, and the head of the ethics committee, and the CEO, whose personal email I found on the company website. I sent a separate package to Jennifer's supervisor. Jennifer worked in the same company but in the marketing department, and she was engaged to another coworker named Tom. Nice guy, always friendly at company events, completely clueless about what his fiancée had been doing. I didn't send anything to Tom directly. I didn't have to. I knew how offices worked. I knew the second HR got involved, the gossip would spread like wildfire. I just had to light the match and wait. The next morning, Mark's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was Patricia. He took the call in the living room, and I could hear his voice getting higher and more panicked as the conversation went on. By the time he hung up, his hands were shaking. He'd been suspended pending an investigation. He had to turn in his laptop and access badge immediately.
The beautiful thing about truth is that you don't have to embellish it. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't make false accusations. I simply presented evidence of what Mark and Jennifer had actually done and let the consequences unfold naturally. Within 48 hours, the entire office knew. Jennifer was also suspended. Tom broke off their engagement publicly, posting a long statement on Facebook about betrayal and dishonesty that got hundreds of sympathetic comments. Mark's coworkers, the same ones who'd been at that bar celebrating with him, started distancing themselves immediately. Nobody wants to be associated with a guy who cheated on his wife while she was losing their baby. It was social poison. The investigation took 2 weeks, and during that time, Mark spiraled. He tried apologizing to me, begging me to call Patricia and tell her it was a misunderstanding, that we were working things out. When that didn't work, he tried anger, accusing me of sabotaging his career, of being vindictive and cruel. His mother called me every single day, sometimes multiple times, crying about how I was destroying her son's life. How could I be so heartless? Didn't I care about our vows? I blocked her number. His brother sent me long text messages about forgiveness and moving forward. I blocked him too. His father, who I'd met exactly 3 times in 6 years, somehow got my email and sent me a rambling message about how women today don't understand loyalty. I marked it as spam. Mark's friends started dropping off too. Most of them were mutual friends, people we'd known as a couple, and when word got out about what actually happened, they had to pick a side. Turns out, nobody wants to defend the guy who abandoned his hemorrhaging wife to hook up with his coworker. A few tried to stay neutral at first, suggesting we all just move past it. But I made it very clear that there was no neutrality available. You either thought what Mark did was unforgivable, or you were okay with that kind of cruelty. And if you were okay with it, I didn't need you in my life. It was clarifying. I lost some people I thought were friends. But the ones who stayed, the ones who showed up with food and sat with me in silence and let me be angry, those were my real friends. The company investigation concluded that Mark and Jennifer had violated multiple ethics policies. They'd falsified expense reports. They'd used company time and resources for personal activities. They created a hostile work environment through their affair, which had been noticed by other coworkers who'd felt uncomfortable but hadn't reported it. Most damningly, they demonstrated a profound lack of judgment and integrity. Patterson and Associates fired them both, not suspended, not reprimanded, terminated for cause, which meant no severance, no good reference, and a black mark on their professional reputations that would follow them forever. Mark's promotion to junior partner evaporated. His 6-figure salary vanished overnight, and because he'd been fired for ethics violations, other firms in the area wouldn't touch him. Jennifer had it even worse in some ways. She'd been planning this big, elaborate wedding to Tom, and everything fell apart spectacularly. Tom didn't just break up with her quietly. He was hurt and humiliated, and he made sure everyone knew why. Her friends turned on her. Her family was mortified. She'd posted so much about her relationship on social media that when it all came crashing down, it was completely public. She had to move back in with her parents at 29 years old, unemployed, and unmarried, explaining to everyone she knew that she'd thrown away her career and relationship for a married man who used her and discarded her the moment it became inconvenient. Mark never stood by her. The second things got difficult, he threw her under the bus, claiming she'd pursued him, that he'd been vulnerable and made a mistake. She posted a series of increasingly unhinged Instagram stories calling him a liar and a coward before deleting her entire account. As for Mark and me, the divorce was brutal and quick. He couldn't afford a good lawyer anymore, and I had documentation of everything: the affair, the financial infidelity, all that money he'd spent on Jennifer that came from our joint accounts, the abandonment during a medical emergency. My lawyer tore him apart. I got the house, I got most of our savings, I got everything I asked for because his lawyer knew if we went to trial, a judge would eviscerate him. Mark's mother tried one last time to get me to reconcile, showing up at my door unannounced, talking about forgiveness and Christian values. I told her that her son had celebrated my miscarriage at a bar while I was hemorrhaging, and if she thought that was forgivable, she'd failed as a mother. I shut the door in her face. She sent me a few nasty emails after that, but eventually she gave up. Mark moved back in with his parents at 34 years old. He eventually found a job, but it was a massive step down. An entry-level position at a small firm that paid less than half what he'd been making. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. People talk, especially in professional circles, and everyone knew what he'd done. Some of his former coworkers went out of their way to make sure potential employers knew exactly who they were considering hiring. He tried dating again, but women would inevitably search his name online and find the story. Jennifer had posted enough publicly, and enough people had shared it that it was permanently part of his digital footprint. The guy who cheated while his wife lost their baby. That's his legacy now. I took some time to heal, both physically and emotionally. Losing a baby is devastating even without the betrayal, and I had to grieve both losses separately. My real friends supported me, my family was incredible, and slowly I started to feel like myself again. Not the same person I'd been before, that woman was gone, but someone stronger, someone who knew exactly what she was worth and wouldn't accept less. I went back to work, threw myself into projects I cared about, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see. I started therapy to process everything, and it helped more than I expected. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Mark at a grocery store. He looked terrible, older, tired, defeated. He tried to talk to me, stammering through some awkward small talk before working up the courage to apologize. He said he was sorry for everything, that he'd been going through something, that he'd made terrible choices, that he wished he could go back and do things differently. I listened politely, and when he finished, I told him I accepted his apology. Not for him, but for me, because holding on to that anger was exhausting, and I was done carrying it. Then I told him I hoped he found whatever he was looking for when he threw away our marriage and celebrated our baby's death. The look on his face told me he'd never actually thought about it that way, and the weight of what he'd done finally hit him. I walked away and never looked back. Sometimes people ask me if the revenge was worth it, if destroying his career and his reputation gave me any satisfaction. The honest answer is complicated. I didn't do it for satisfaction. I did it because there had to be consequences. Mark didn't just cheat. He didn't just have an affair.
He abandoned me during the worst moment of my life, celebrated my trauma, and expected to get away with it because men always seem to get away with it. His brother thought I should give him a break. His mother thought strong women forgive these things. Society expects women to be understanding, to make excuses, to prioritize keeping the peace over demanding basic human decency. I refuse to play that game.
The truth is, Mark destroyed his own life. I just made sure people knew the truth. If his actions couldn't withstand daylight, that wasn't my problem. If his career couldn't survive people knowing what kind of person he really was, then maybe he shouldn't have been in that career. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't lie. I simply refused to protect him from the natural consequences of his choices. And that was apparently enough to unravel everything he'd built. It taught me something important about the men who get away with terrible behavior. They only get away with it because women are conditioned to stay silent, to protect their reputations, to prioritize everyone else's comfort over their own dignity. I'm in a different place now. I'm dating someone new, someone kind and honest, who showed up when I had nothing to offer but trauma and trust issues, and stayed anyway. We're taking things slow, but for the first time in years, I feel hopeful about the future. I think about the babies sometimes, wonder who they would have been, what kind of life we would have had. But I don't think about Mark anymore, except for when stories like this come up. Or when someone asks me what happened to my ex-husband, then I tell them the truth. Not the sanitized version where everyone's feelings are protected and we just grew apart. The real version, where he celebrated my miscarriage at a bar and lost everything because of it. If you're reading this or watching this because you're going through something similar, because someone betrayed you at your most vulnerable, and people are telling you to let it go, to be the bigger person, to forgive and forget, I want you to know something. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to protect someone's reputation when they didn't protect your heart. You're not vindictive for wanting accountability. You're not cruel for refusing to minimize what was done to you. The people who tell you to move on are usually the people who benefit from you staying quiet. Don't stay quiet. Tell your truth. Let the chips fall where they may. You deserve better than being someone's dirty secret or acceptable loss. The last thing I'll say is this. Mark texts me sometimes, usually late at night, usually when he's been drinking. He apologizes again, tells me he thinks about what he lost every day, asks if there's any chance we could try again. I never respond, not because I'm still angry, but because there's nothing left to say. He didn't lose me because of what I did. He lost me because of who he was, who he chose to be in the moment when I needed him most. That's not something you come back from. That's not something you fix with apologies or time. Some betrayals are permanent. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. And I'm completely at peace with that. If this story resonated with you, or if you've been through something similar and needed to hear that you're not crazy for being hurt, for being angry, for wanting justice, hit that subscribe button. There are too many stories like this, too many people who've been betrayed and gaslit and told their pain doesn't matter. But it does matter. You matter. Your story matters. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone rewrite history, refusing to disappear quietly, refusing to pretend that what happened was anything other than what it was. Truth is powerful. Use it wisely.